Very good evening to everybody today. Welcome to live interaction with global change makers. Today we have with us a very special guest, a very young, dynamic leader in the space of sustainability and CSR. She completed her MS in Sustainability Management from Columbia University and a BS in Environmental Science from UCLA. After completing these, she rose up in the corporate ladder and worked with Danaher, worked with Fortune 200 companies, and presently is an account director at Flag USA. We all would like to welcome Sargam Saraf. Welcome on the show, Sargam.
Thanks, Arjuna. Thanks for that introduction. Very excited to be here.
It's an honor to have you on our show today. So Sargam, we see that you've always been motivated with climate change and sustainability, and you also completed your bachelor's and master's in the same. What was your inspiration behind this?
Sure. So I think it was a bit of like genetics because I grew up in a family that's full of academics and scholars. My mom's a lawyer. My dad was an environmentalist all my life when I was growing up. But I think over the few years, so I went to school, like you mentioned, at UCLA, and for the longest time, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But very much like my family, I thought, PhD was the right route for me. So I worked in UCLA geography, UCLA public policy, and decided this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I just thought maybe not going the academic route made most sense for me. So since then, it's become a little more like nuanced, my interest in sustainability. It's gone beyond science, it's gone into finance and all of the different things that ESG/sustainability comes with. So I think I am fully dedicated to saving the planet one day at a time in whatever capacity I can.
Wonderful. That's really motivating for many viewers today. So according to you, how does ESG directly impact the financial performance of a company? Because there are many questions around it.
Yeah, I think we've actually seen a lot of healthy cynicism around it in the recent few years. It's become quickly popular. And what happens is when something's become popular, it's accepted easily, but it isn't challenged as much. But I think with sustainability, what we've seen is /ESG, I'm going to use them interchangeably. What we've seen is because it's getting a lot of scrutiny, there's more and more research being done. So far, I think there have been 2,000 plus research papers written on, linking ESG to financial performance. And a lot of times, they're just like, it could be a causation thing or it could be a correlation thing. And in all honesty, we don't have a definitive link between the two. But what I will say is from like the 2,000 papers written on the 70% point towards being a positive relationship between the two, which just means if a company it has ESG initiatives in place, if they're thinking about their environmental impact or their social engagements, how they're working with local communities, or just have different things that they're doing for human rights, all the way to like corruption and other governance related things, that company has definitely done better in terms of ESG investing or performance from a triple bottom line standpoint. And I think there's like various reasons why this happens. Some of the few I can name here are obviously there's like a reputational risk when it comes to like not being good, especially what we've seen in the last 2 years. Doing the right thing when it comes to social engagement is quite important. How you're treating your employees, how you're treating like minorities in different parts of the world. That's very important. So there's that reputational risk aspect. The other thing I think is if you are a company that focuses on being more resource effective, it has to have a direct impact on costs. If you're saving energy or if you're saving waters, there's been a lot of companies that have saved money over a few years. There's a bit of a payback, but it definitely it tends in the right direction. And what that comes with, I think, is also regulatory intervention. So if you're being conscientious about how you're using natural resources or how you're governing your company or how you're treating like just how you deal with social issues. So what it comes with is eventually, and how we're seeing regulatory bodies and compliance is quickly changing. We've seen EU Green Deal become a thing. We're seeing countries becoming more serious about sustainability reporting. So if you are functioning in a way where you know this is going to be important, and it is important to you right now, you will be sort of like evading all of the risk when it comes to regulations and compliance in the future. And ultimately, I think it's also about talent. I'm sure I might be preaching to the choir here, but for a lot of us, like growing up now, what we've realized is we want to work at a company that represents and aligns with our personal values. Like, it's important to me, I work at a company that treats women well or treats people of color well. And they're not just like talking the talk, but also walking the walk. So in terms of talent, attractiveness, and retention, I think ESG is a great thing to do. So that's also bound to have a financial impact on and the performance of your company. And then finally, in like the most finance person sort of way, I think just acclimating to change, your preparedness to changing times, and just being fully ready for worst case scenario in the future, and quickly like weighing your risks and opportunities when it comes to climate change or climate related events. It's going to help you with your credit worthiness. So I think there's definitely a direct relationship between financial performance and ESG initiatives in place. Oh, I think you're on mute.
How would you actually define a ESG compliant company, and how can a conventional MSME transform itself into a ESG compliant company?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And a lot of corporations and institutions, even like nonprofits, are now kind of like dabbling into this, like how do we become quote unquote a sustainability company? So the challenge with that is there's not a lot of standardization when it comes to what it truly means to be ESG compliant. There aren't a lot of laws that can, give you the stamp of approval saying, oh, you're sustainable versus you're not. It's often like comparing apples to oranges. For me personally, what I think a company at any stage of their current existence, could be pre-IPO all the way to a startup, or all the way to a fully established publicly traded company, what you can do is you can start reporting. I think reporting is a great exercise, because what that means is you're looking at how things are currently being operated, and you're in a place where you're talking about that. And when you're talking about something that invites a little bit of like, I guess, like vulnerability and risk, right? What I do think comes from reporting is I think the next level of reporting is going to be about not just the positive aspects. Don't just talk about all of the philanthropic things you're doing or what you're doing to, save a few metric tons. Talk about the negative effect you've also had on the environment. And so I think reporting is number one. The number two part of that would be like how you talk about risk. And when I'm talking about risk, it's like anything and everything. If it's like climate change related, or is it, social change related, or is it governance, corruption, bribery, anything and everything, like you have to talk about the risk of it and how you're dealing with it. And then ultimately, both of those should inform and also talk about your investments. Like, how are you really like translating into something more actionable? I think if you do these things at some stage, in whatever capacity, at whatever scale that you can, you are more likely to be ESG compliant, quote unquote. And then I think one specific thing I'd like to say about reporting is we're starting to see integrated reporting sort of become a big thing. So, connecting financial performance with ESG, that's really, really a great way to do it, because what's material to your business, and then talking about it in a more, in the context of ESG is a good sign. So for a company that's looking to be ESG compliant, I would say like report, talk about your risks, and talk about your investments and how you're like really moving forward in this space.
Wonderful. Now, I'm glad that you shared about this. But don't you think that many companies, even now, think that being sustainable is a very expensive business? So, what is your take on the cost-benefit analysis of the same?
That's also a really, really good question. I think a lot of companies have, and you must have seen, like I see job boards seeing like a new position that's ESG or sustainability related, like pop up every single day, if not more often. So the cost, I think, does not outweigh the benefit. Like we've talked about how it affects the financial performance of a company in the long term. So if it is a cost, I think it's more of an investment with a high ROI. For a company that's thinking about being more sustainable, I don't think it's technically an expensive business for the long term, because I think what it equips you to do is it'll open new markets for you. Like it'll expand new horizons for you if you're doing something that's more sustainable or better for the ESG different buckets. Like we've seen with Unilever, they launched a sustainable product. A lot of their revenue came from that. Customer loyalty came from that. There's a Finnish company called Neste that did, or like essentially their work was it was around like petroleum refining, and then they diversified their portfolio and focused on renewable products, and 2/3 of their revenue comes from that. So I think it'll expand your horizons like that. You can tap into new markets. You can expand in the current space that you are. Another way, I think it can, again, like going back to what I was talking about, reducing cost, like that's a big benefit for people that focus mostly on numbers. If you're being more resource effective and conscious about your impact, reducing costs is going to also be a big benefit if you start like cutting down or like figuring out ways to either make your supply chain more green or how you operate. There's a lot of like other legal risks and regulation risks that you can evade by being more sustainable. So there's a benefit in that. And going back to like the talent thing, like hiring talent, retaining talent, I think it's a great thing to do, and it's really expensive to hire new talent and then train them and onboard them. So being a company that focuses on sustainability and different parts of ESG, it positions you in a way where you are definitely at some point in the future likely to succeed. And then ultimately, again, going back to risks and investments, like just optimizing your investments and thinking about like CapEx or like capital expenditures, I think you're in a better position in terms of like the longevity of your business, because what sustainable really means is something that's going to last long. And thinking about that and how you operate, I think there's definitely way more benefits and it outweighs the cost, at least in my opinion.
Wonderful. So while we have to do this, the ESG transformation work, my next question to you would be, what are the change management tools and who are the direct, indirect stakeholders to implement ESG in a company?
Yeah, so I'll take the stakeholder part first, and then I'll respond to what change management tools can be leveraged or used. So there's always, like for most companies, there's the investors. For a lot of like other institutions and companies, there's the customer, and there's the customer of the customer. Then we have local communities, people that are being affected by your existence, and also by people that may not be engaging with you directly. So we have the local communities. We have NGOs that often like stand for the right thing and really like sort of like gatekeep ways to operate. So I think that's really good. And then we also have like just people in science, what kind of effect it has, like a lot of like questions and effect a company has comes from the science communities, academics, researchers, companies that make claims, often are challenged by like, oh, we don't think you can say that, it's not derived from X, Y, and Z, or, things. So there's a lot of like stakeholders at play here, and there's a big diversity in what angles each of them come from. So it gets really tricky because here you are trying to do the right thing, but it could mean a different thing for each of the different stakeholder involved. What an investor is looking for may not be the same thing as even a customer, what they're looking for, right? Because ultimately the customer is going to pay for something and the investor is looking for a profitable business. So there's a little bit of like push and pull in different directions. But I think ultimately, for change management tools, I think the way I would approach it as a current and a future leader would be like having the conversation, talking about what sustainability really means, and it has to come from like leadership. So your C-suite, your EVPs, your board of directors, they need to start asking about, hey, what are we doing that kind of speaks to sustainability? What are we doing that falls under the E bucket? What are we doing for governance? Do we have things in place that helps us do the right thing and be the right or function the right way? And I think once the leadership starts talking about it, having conversations with all these different stakeholders, I think maybe the right thing to do is, okay, let's sit down and, really discuss, this is what's material to the business. How can we help you meet your needs or what you're looking for? So a great change management tool, I also personally think having conversations and working through things is a great way to do things. So I'm going to say it's like very simple. Just create a culture around sustainability, have those transparent conversations, and also have those transparent conversations externally. Because as an outsider, a lot of people aren't privy to the knowledge on how things work. So that's my non-answer to it.
No, thanks. That means a lot. Now, why do you think in all these years, ESG has become so important right now? And how many approximate funds are there internationally for the same? Which are the most touted or known funds in the space of ESG?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two big things. Well, we just saw the IPCC report come out and we saw people's reaction to it. Climate change is a very serious thing. It may seem invisible to a lot of people in like developed / privileged setting, where we're not directly affected by that 1 degree change in Earth's temperature. We'll just up our AC or like we'll reduce our AC temperature and move on with our life. I think there's that lack of personal connection when it comes to climate change and its negative effect. On the flip side, a lot of companies / other people that may be in less privileged settings, they're starting to get the brunt of it. They're seeing extreme weather events. They're seeing so many different things that climate change has a huge in a human intervention. I think one of the big reasons for climate change is how we have been using Earth's resources and how we've affected things, right? So it's becoming more apparent over time that this is coming, and this is not something we can just not deal with. This is going to affect all of us because we're inhabitants of this planet Earth. And the second thing is, I think the financial community has seen how important it is. So they've kind of brought it back to their institutions and said, this is the future of sustainability. This is the future of business. So it's been a little bit of this is what the trend is and this is how we should address it. And also this is going to be profitable, which I think I'm sort of okay with, because if you're focusing on ultimately doing the right thing, whatever your inspiration is, that's fine by me, as long as this is the direction we're all heading in. So you're starting to see more and more portfolio managers, asset managers talk about ESG funds. And for people that here might not be well versed with what an ESG fund is, so an ESG fund is a portfolio of securities, of bonds, and of all sorts of have equities that you can invest in. The only difference between normal investing versus ESG investing is that these have gone through a stringent ESG test of time. So what a lot of risk agencies or rating agencies do is they look at your sustainability report, they look at the controversy section in Wikipedia and really see like, okay, what kind of effect are you having? And then they kind of allocate them into different funds, and that ultimately goes to the investor or any investor of any scale, and then they can look and decide, okay, this is the company we want as a part of our portfolio. And because this has become so popular, the Vanguards of the world, so many of the other like pension funds, other index focused portfolios now are starting to show ESG companies or socially conscious companies. So I would say it's now become a $1 trillion market where like the money is like exactly where we're going. So those are like some of the few big ones that I can think about. And this is worldwide. It's not just the US, there's UK based, a really big pension fund, I think in Japan is focused on ESG and being more socially conscious. There's another big one. I don't remember the names, but there's a big one in Germany. I think it's called, I'm going to butcher it, so I'm not going to try, but it's definitely becoming a big thing for sure.
Wonderful. So now that you mentioned that this is coming to all of us across the globe, even in India, we have seen a lot of progress on this front from SBI to HDFC and others. So what do you think an emerging country like India should do in order to accelerate this process?
Yeah, I think so. The good thing about India is, it is one of like the oldest civilizations. So we had a lot in terms of resources, and that may have changed because of our recent history. But I think that being said, India is still the largest democracy. It is the largest upcoming, if not already, emerging market. So there's a lot of scope and potential. And just in terms of human capital, there's just so much. So I'm very, very, very excited for the future for my country. I think specifically what we can do at this stage is, because we're quickly growing, a lot of that has some sort of impact on the environment, right? Because we're focusing on quick growth, like how do we globalize quickly? How do we like match up with the other countries with like a higher GDP? I would say what we can do is like slow down a little bit and focus on the right things, because being at this stage of our journey in growth and development, if we start thinking about sustainability and make it a core of our business, just the way we operate, thinking about the environment, thinking about what kind of effect it has on someone who doesn't have a seat on the table or may not have their voice heard, including them. And then also just in terms of like having the right governance structure where we're thinking about regulations, we're looking around us, we're thinking about how, COP22 or other G7 countries are approaching sustainability, like leveraging those partnerships and really like bringing it back home and doing it in a way where we're not developing for today, we're developing for tomorrow, and we need that to be sustainable. And I guess like that pun is intended. So I would say, because we're quickly growing, like let's bring it back to what's most important and kind of like restructure the way we do business. Like it's not about winning the race, it's about the actual process of getting there and doing it in a way where, along the way, we're not doing more damage.
Okay, great. Now that you mentioned about it, how important do you think that the startup scenario in India and the entrepreneurs could play a key role in this transformation?
I think the power of scale on whatever end that you are of the spectrum is the impact you can have. So for a startup, it's on the other side of the spectrum. You're so nimble. You have so much flexibility in how you operate and do things, and how really you can be an industry leader very quickly by setting the stage. Like this may be sort of like on the lines of this may be how we've done things, but this is how we should be doing things. So in terms of like product innovation, thinking about a truly sustainable product where they've considered using the resources that they use in anything from like single-use plastics to how it's being transported to end of life, where it's going to end up for a tangible product, or internet-based things, because India's again like really good at in the tech sector. So just thinking about products that's like more ethical when it comes to how and what we use it for, the effect it has on like data centers use a lot of energy. So like consciously thinking about what are some other ways we can either like offset it or sort of like get ahead of it before it becomes an issue. So startups can definitely leverage how nimble they are and be like agile in the way they approach things. So I think having talent or having people with a little bit of a sustainability mindset in each of their different roles that they bring to the table, that would be really good for a startup, where they're like, oh, we hadn't considered that, but since we have now, let's pivot a little. And you keep pivoting until you come up with a product that kind of like checks off all the different things when it comes to sustainability. So there's that. And there's also a lot of capital that goes into it. Like a lot of venture capitalists are increasingly becoming aware, and it's becoming a part of their growth strategy. So there's also that sort of plus point for startups looking for like seed funding or whatever. So there's a good like business case for sustainability as well.
Okay. Now, see, since ESG has just come into picture, though we all were doing CSR sustainability way back, but in order to develop professionals who can work on ESG and the present professionals to upskill them, what are the kind of courses that we as an institution should run, since we are dedicated to responsible business leadership? So any insights on that? What are the lags that you see and the future prospects?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'm a huge fan of science. Like by DNA, I come from a very science family. So everything that's happening currently is rooted in science. And a lot of that is like climate change, climate science. So if I were to do things, I would make it mandatory for people to take at least 1 or 2 classes about what it truly means. And I think like going back to what I was saying about having that personal connection, or like having just that lack of knowledge, there's a lot of apprehension because it's not something you can see. It's a longer term effect. So people don't quite fully understand what it means to have sea level rise or like have the glaciers melt, So having in training or having a conversation at any level, student all the way to like a top executive, having that science class, like let's go back, let's do environmental science again. I think that's a good thing to do. The other thing is understanding qualitative and quantitative effect of how you function. So that could be finance, that could be sustainability related like metrics, and that's like anything and everything, like diversity data, energy, waste, water, transportation, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. There's just so much when it comes to that. So sharing that with people in finance, with people in different roles and capacities, just having them understand what that means and what kind of effect it has on wherever they are. I think that's important. And that might be a tricky one to do. It may not be done now, but I would say like have something that like truly educates you, at least like gives you the foundation that you can build upon in whatever capacity that you can. And I think you guys have a pretty unique position with that, where you can have more and more people come in from different backgrounds and have them talk to your members, or like have programs and trainings that support 2 of the things that I just mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you so much for answering all my questions so patiently. On this note, may I invite my fellow co-panelist, Dr. Michael Hopkins, to please come forth and ask his set of questions. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm a bit breathless, although I haven't said anything, of listening to you. First of all, congratulations on your experience and your eloquence in actually delivering fairly complex ideas. I have so many questions to ask you. I don't quite know where to start, but let me start with some practical things. You said you're in Washington, D.C. right now?
Mm-hmm, I am, yes.
Okay. Have you ever come across George Mason University? Because I used to teach corporate responsibility there.
Oh, that's
George
very
Mason.
cool.
Yeah,
I have not interacted. I do have a friend who did I think she got a degree in public policy from there.
okay. Well, anyway, if we can get in communication with each other, I'd be very happy to put you in
Absolutely.
contact with a few people there. And the other thing is, I saw in your background that you studied at Columbia University on sustainable management. Did you ever come across my friend John Lawrence there, Professor John Lawrence in Columbia?
I don't, what do they teach?
Okay, he teaches with Sachs on development essentially, but also sustainable development and the rest of it. And he runs our office on corporate responsibility and sustainability out of New York.
Are you talking about Jeffrey Sachs?
Yeah, I got his name wrong, probably. Yeah, with Jeffrey Sachs, and they have I shouldn't say this in public, but they have a love-hate relationship, like I think many people do with Jeffrey. But that aside, the other thing is that would interest me. I run something called an international meetup series on corporate responsibility and sustainability. We have every 3 weeks, and the most recent one was 1 or 2 days ago on cybernetics and ethics. But we'd love you to come along and talk to us one day on ESG. We could talk a little bit about what sort of aspects, but I don't think you would need much preparation actually from your wealth of experience. I see Ramesh Daswani is with us as well, and Maga as well. They're both active people in our meetup. So it will be very nice. About half an hour chat, followed by 45 minutes discussion and so on. And I think ESG, there's no question that it's a huge topic. It has been for many years, but it's only quite recently that I see almost every day in the Financial Times some research on it. And even my bank, by the way, in Geneva, in Switzerland, I'm actually sitting in Kenya right now, but when I'm living in Europe, I'm in Geneva, in Switzerland, and my bank there was recommending to me 3 years ago to invest in ESG companies around the world. So I thought that from UBS of Switzerland. So the fact that they were actually getting onto it quite stunned me. I think I've been talking to them for years about these sorts of issues. So I'm quite pleased about it. I'm very, very, very interested in the sorts of things you're doing. Let me also add something on leadership. We have an Institute for Responsible Leadership out of London, and Harsh works with us. Happy if you could link in with us in some way. Institute of Responsible Leadership. Again, I can if you just Google it, you'll find it. But be happy if you could link in with that, with some of the work that you're doing. And then I love what you said about science, and I'll explain a little thing that happened to me just about an hour ago. I was buying some fish, and as I was walking into the shop, there was a beautiful black cat. And I always remember the superstition in England was that if a black cat runs in front of you, then that brings you luck. And for some reason, I don't know why, there's a crowd of people there. I mean, they're mainly Muslims because it's a day for them today. I mean, lots of decent Muslims in the world. It's not all tough stuff that we're reading about recently. And I said to this chap, I said, where I come from, crossing a black cat in your path, it's meant to bring you luck. And he said, where I come from, it brings you bad luck.
Yeah, that's the thing in India too.
And then he said, that's what I believe in. And then now I've been having a long discussion on the word belief and what's the evidence for your belief? What's the science behind it? So I suddenly thought after that, here's me pushing science and now coming up with a superstition. And so I kick myself on that. Anyway, that's the story that just came. But let me turn to a couple of questions on ESG. One I'd like to ask is the link to the public sector. We've been trying to get corporate social responsibility in the public sector, well, especially where I am in East Africa, where, strangely enough, the companies behave more socially responsible or more sustainable, or whatever phrase we use these days. I'm pretty keen on definitions, but don't let's get there. But whatever you use these days, there's no question that the private sector is more socially responsible, believe it or not, in this part of Africa than the public sector. And I think that it might be worth looking at that. So what does ESG mean? If you've ever thought about it in the public sector, and then perhaps also in the third sector, either the NGOs or the sustainable enterprise sector. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. And my other question is that I've just sorry to keep on going on with questions. It was such a good talk that you gave. I'm sorry, you stimulated me to come. And it looks like a little African boy has just come up my knee. Come and say hello to everybody. He doesn't speak English. Hi, say hello, everybody. You're talking around the world here. Okay. See if I can get his mother to take him away. Oh, now he's here. I'm not sure I'm going to get to my last question, and then I'll turn myself off, which is I've just finished a book on corporate responsibility and the big issues of the day, which I'm encouraging big companies to start looking at the big issues of the day. And of course, climate change is one of them. Did you ever come across any research on that yourself? Normally, I define corporate responsibility as treating all stakeholders responsibly, okay? And then all key stakeholders, and then the big discussion, what do you mean by all those things? But I won't go into that right now. And Harsh is already saying, my goodness, Michael's off again. So I'll come to an end on that. I just wondered, the big issues of the day. When you were at Columbia looking at sustainable management, did you discuss that at all? You mentioned two companies which I know very well, Unilever and Nestle. In fact, Nestle I have in my book, and I suggested that all companies should have a charter on the big issues of the day, but not too long. We don't want too many reports and too big ones. I'm just suggesting 10-page reports. And in fact, I wrote one out for Nestle, and I've been discussing that with them. Happy to send you a copy of that. It'll come out in the book in a few months' time. So lots of ideas, lots of questions, and I'm going to agree with Harsha, and I'll stop now. Thank you very much.
Well, it's super nice to meet you, and thank you for saying all the things that you did. I've actually been to Kenya. I was there a couple of years ago, and I had such a good time. I've been to like maybe 6 countries in Africa, and each single time I've had the time of my life. Eventually, I hope to end up there too, but let's see. So I'll start with your second question first, and then go to your first question. The big issues of the day, at least for like where I am physically, so for the United States, I think we've seen one is obviously the pandemic. It's just made it so much more apparent to us how fragile the way businesses, the way organizations have been structured. Public health was just not a consideration. It wasn't a topic that was discussed. This has really shown us where the cracks are. So there's a big issue of the day with the pandemic, making it more apparent and noticeable about things we should have thought about. For something as simple as a restaurant, where you do not have a fully functioning kitchen, how would you pay your workers? Or if you were to not have any way of delivering food, how are you to sustain your business? So it's things like that, from a very small scale to a much larger company that's we don't have inventory, or we're having X issue in our supply chain, which has a cascading effect. These things need to be discussed. There has to be a more robust risk management, enterprise resource risk management around that. And the other thing I think is from a social perspective, I think suddenly over the last 2 years, I'm seeing human rights become a topic of discussion. And that's baffling to me. That's just something that I just don't understand. Like, why did it take so long to be an issue? Like, people work with you, people get affected by you, people work for you. And that should be like the top of your priority list at any stage, because your business is nothing without having people engage with. So I think another big issue of the day is human rights, like how you treat your labor, how things you're doing may visibly or invisibly affecting different people. That should also be a big focus of how you operate. And then there's like a few other issues that we've seen, especially in like an American context, just like the racial inequity and just social inequity for a lot of things. Again, I'm talking about like wage gap, and that might be a more worldwide issue, racial stuff, or like just having any sort of like xenophobic or discriminatory like basis of differences. I think that is also something that we need to address on, and that kind of like closely ties in with human rights. Like, it's your basic right to be in any space, in any capacity. Like, you're not more than or less than anyone. So I think those two are like really relevant big issues of the day. The other one, obviously, without a say, and it's not for the day, it's for a decade long, like climate change. A lot of people seem to think, well, it could just be another little ice age, so we'll be fine even if global warming is going to be a thing. And it's like, that's not how it works. Like, you don't just open a refrigerator on like a fire. These have longer term effects on a lot of things, and it's going to change in temperature is going to affect aquatic life. It's going to affect horticulture. It's going to affect how you feed. So ultimately, it's going to affect your life. And I think making that connection or being very transparent about, yes, we're talking about a global temperature change, or we're talking about sea level rise, or we're talking about melting ice caps, but what it truly means for you and what that looks like. I think that's a big issue of the day, where I think science is not properly communicating what it means. It just becomes a thing. Oh, this report came out, but what does it actually mean for the average person? And that's why I also think like education has a big part to play in that, where we're like making it digestible and accessible for people in remoter parts of the world. Like, I did a project in Uganda, and one of the biggest things I struggled with was, as someone in an Ivy League school working on a project, we only spend like 10 days in Uganda. Like, we're not going to teach them how to deal with change. So I think like we have to make it accessible and digestible in a way where what it means for someone who is sitting here versus who's sitting in a different place, or is like a farmer or anything and everything else. Like, everyone needs to be on the same page about this, and we just have to figure out a way to do that. So I think it's going to be like communications and like just fully understanding the effective things. That's going to be another big issue of the day. If that answers your question, I'm going to move to the first one.
More than answers, it opens even some other ideas, and certainly on communications, I'm 100% with you. And I started a new venture myself on that, but I won't say about that. I'm just going to brag about the view in front of me, by the way, which is the view right in front of my eyes right now. So I got away from a rather boring view of some of my books to what's reality. This is east coast of Kenya, absolutely gorgeous, as you can see.
Yeah.
And it's right in front of me now. The bougainvilleas out, that color and everything. But I shouldn't be talking about that. Let's get back to more.
Is that the image? Is that the background image for you?
Sorry?
Is that what the background image is?
Yeah, it's in front of me. Yeah, right in front of me. Just I'm in my office. I've been here a year and a half because of COVID. I managed to escape to Europe a few weeks ago, but the temptation to come back here was enormous. So it's been wonderful. But there's one other thing I wanted to say. We had if I may, Harsha, the other day we had a seminar on cyber ethics, and one of the worrying things there was artificial intelligence could take over from humans. And the person cited was no less a figure than, as you remember, the Nobel Prize winner Richard Dawkins, who died a few years ago. And he was incredibly worried about it. And I was quite interested, and I turned the tables on the head in saying that artificial intelligence will take over, and therefore humans will be at the beck of the call of machines. Is that maybe machines will do a better job on climate change, because they will see that climate change is going to be very, very difficult for the machine. If they get swamped with water, they ain't going to work at all. So maybe artificial intelligence might be the way ahead. I mean, that's just a thought that came to me. Maybe it's a bit of an idle thought. But
I
Sargam, thank you.
Of course. No, thank you so much for your questions. And your other question was about public sector and different organizations and NGOs. Just a quick point on that, I think, because the private sector's involved, and a lot of it's like a positive feedback loop. So either pressure comes from NGOs or the public sector onto them, or like the private sector putting the pressure on them, and also like a lot of the ways grants are given to NGOs and how you operate. So everyone is like part of the ecosystem. And for me, it's not necessarily a sector thing. Like there's other things like being a B Corp. It's not necessarily a private sector thing, but there's other like resources and other sort of like influencing factors in different sectors. So I'd like to think it's like an overall landscape change. Also, no pun intended with that one.
So where do you go next?
In life, or just with this specifically?
No, professionally. I mean, professionally. You're working with a company now, but out of Washington D.C. or still out of India, or wherever?
So I am physically based in Washington D.C., but my job doesn't require me to be in Washington D.C. I actually recently changed jobs, and I've been in this job this is my 6th month being here, and I work with clients, and what I help them do is figure out strategies for sustainability, what it really means, what they're currently doing, and then how to effectively communicate it. I'm really liking this. I've always wanted to work with people and always wanted to be in a more problem-solving space. So I think for the next few years, I see myself doing that, and then eventually, I do want to be in either Asia or Africa. And then, I think it's just such a good time to join everyone in their journeys. And I think it'll be a great learning experience for me, as well as I think where I can leverage some of my strengths and give back.
Yeah, excellent. But by the way, my last comment, sorry, Harsha. The Chamber of Commerce, just over the river from you, has just set up an institute for CSR and corporate citizenship. I worked with them when I was in Washington. I left Washington in about 2013, I think. I worked for them for 7 or 8 years, trying to instill some of these ideas into the Chamber of Commerce, without an awful lot of success at that time, because as usual, when you come up with different ideas, they think you're totally crazy. But I was amazed. About a year or so ago, they set up this institute for, can't remember, I think it's for corporate citizenship. It might have been called Institute for Corporate Social Responsibility. And you might want to go and have a chat with them just over the river, see where they are. Sure. And I'm sure they'll be very interested to talk to you too. All from me. Thank you very much. And I hope we can be in contact, and that you can come along and talk at one of our meetups in the next couple of months.
Thanks so much, Michael. Okay. It's lovely speaking to you.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for the questions, Dr. Hopkins. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. May I invite Mr. Johnny Talreja to ask his set of questions.
Yeah. Hi. Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Sargam, for throwing us some light on what is ESG and what are the practical, you can say, implementation part of the ESG. So good to know that ESG also helps in getting us a better ROI, right? Ma'am, I'm just interested in knowing, can you please give some real life examples of how ESG has helped the companies in decreasing their operating cost? As you said, ESG helps in decreasing the cost. So if you can give us some examples of that. And my second question would be, is ESG mandatory in US? Yeah, these are the two questions, please. Thanks.
I'm just making a note so I don't forget the question. So the first one is, how do you reduce operating costs? Examples of that. And the second is mandatory reporting in the United States. So that one's an easy one to answer. I'll start with that. It's not mandatory yet. The SEC is looking into making it mandatory. I know the UK has already made it mandatory, at least to report on TCFD, which is a disclosure framework that sort of talks about strategy, risk management, governance, and metrics and targets. So very much like that. In the United States, there's a lot of seriousness around sustainability, but because there isn't a standardized one size fits all, or this is the one thing that we need to do to meet some of the requirements of it, there isn't such a thing yet. But because of how quickly and how important it is becoming to different players in this space, I can see that be a thing in the next few years. I think reporting on human rights is going to be one of the first things that becomes mandatory. I think GRI may already be talking about that. And United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, they're also discussing how do we make it more digestible for different businesses and having benchmarks that you can report on. So I think it being mandatory, there needs to be that standardization. You can't just be oh, this is required, but also we don't know what it is. So while we work through that, I see it being something in the next few years. In fact, if SASB, which is Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, sort of an equivalent of FASB, which is financial reporting, so I think it's going to be one of those players that make it a thing, and that's picked up and asked and reported on. And while until and unless that's finalized, it's not going to be mandatory. So that's my long-winded answers. Not yet, but soon. The first question about examples of reducing operating costs. So the first thing that comes to my mind is how tech companies like Dell, HP have significantly reduced their packaging. And what packaging, while they're approaching packaging saying oh, we don't use plastic or anything with a plastic film. Now we've switched to reusable or ocean plastics, or we've switched to reusable cardboard. What they've essentially done is by removing a lot of the things in their packaging, they've reduced the weight of their product. And when you reduce the weight of your product, the transportation cost also goes down because that's by weight, right? So there may be a little bit of a little bit of cost that went into changing their supply chain and repackaging their products, but ultimately the way it was being distributed and transported kind of brought the money back. So that's one way of reducing your operating costs. The other one is, just how a product is being used. You want people that buy your product to keep coming back. So a lot of thought and innovation goes into doing that. And a lot of the times they're thinking about different ways to even market it. And sometimes it's environmental effect. So if something uses less energy or uses less water, or if the dyes are Levi's jeans, it's known to be really disruptive to the environment because of the dye they use and how it stains water. It takes a lot of washing the jeans to make sure, the color sticks. And now they're focusing on reducing their water use. So not only did they keep their product quality intact or figure out a way to keep their product quality intact, but also reduce their water use. So there's they're saving money on doing that. And there's just so many other ways that I think 3M used to have a program, and they've had a program since 1975 called Pollution Prevention Program. So it's 3M's 3Ps. And they heavily focused on either electrifying their fleet or reducing energy costs in how they operate, switching to a technology that supports working within a frame in a more effective way where you're only using energy where you need to. I think since 1975, they've saved $2 billion just in operating costs. So there's definitely tangible, meaningful, easy to approach ways to reduce how much you're spending. Maybe not just now, but you'll see the effect of it in the longer term. Does that answer your question? Sure.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Sargam. I know that we are bombarding you with a lot of questions.
It's totally fine.
Mr. Daswani, would you have any questions? Others, if you all have any questions, please feel free to let us know.
Oh, I have no questions, but I just wanted to compliment Sargam on the good work she's doing. Sorry, I joined the meeting a little late, so I didn't get a chance to hear you speak. But knowing Harsha, she will share the recording with us. And if we have any questions, we'll always come back to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But on a personal front, you said you're in DC.
I am in DC, yeah.
Okay. My son also lives in DC, incidentally.
Very
He
cool.
just moved there about a year ago. And he has been just fortunate to get his H-1B visa. So he's very excited with that. And I love that city you live in. So wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. I've been here for almost 2 years, but I'm not going to count the last year because nothing much happened then. But really, really a big fan of the city.
So thank you so much, Sargam, for joining us today and taking time out from your busy schedule and all the wealth of knowledge that you've shared with us and for the future viewers and on behalf of all the panelists and our students, everybody. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks so much for organizing and reaching out. It was really nice meeting everyone here.
All the best.
All right.
And
Thank
namaste
you.
from India.
Sorry?
Namaste from India.
Namaste from Washington, DC.